So the premise of Baccano is a little hard to sum up in a short way, so I'm going to try my best to explain this without spoiling anything. Baccano essentially takes place in the Prohibition in the United States in two separate locations, one of which in New York City, and the other on board an oncoming train called the Flying Pussyfoot. Pussyfoot's an actual word. Look it up. And every character in this movie is either a mobster, a thief, a terrorist, or some criminal of some kind, but there's a little twist to it. Some of these characters are immortal. And when these characters start to cross paths amongst one another in these three separate storylines, supposedly separate anyways, things start to become very violent and very out of control. Baccano is pretty much what would happen if Tarantino made an anime, because this show pretty much has his fingerprints all over it. The story is told in a nonlinear fashion, it has the same style of dialogue, every character in the show is pretty much an anti-hero, and the violence is very over the top in its carnage, and it makes for one of my favorite TV shows of all time. The thing I love the most about this show is the characters, because no matter how much depth they have, or no matter how long they're in the show for, they each have these eccentric personality traits that not only make them enjoyable, but also distinguish themselves from one another. But since it's a big cast, I'm going to try to narrow it down to some of my favorite characters. I do like characters like Thero, Luck Gandor, Niece Holystone, Claire. I feel like Jacuzzi is a character that I should hate just because he panics at just about everything. And plus, his name's Jacuzzi Splot, people. Where do you come up with this stuff? But at the same time, I just think it's funny that this cowardly guy is in charge of his own gang. And yet, when he puts himself on the line for others and does risk his life, it does make sense because we've seen him interact with these people and he has a very polite and likable personality to him. Lad Russo I just love because of how theatrical and excited he is in his sadistic nature. It's really hard not to enjoy it with him. And I like how he likes to think of himself as a reminder that anyone can die. You know, he doesn't look for anyone in particular except for people who supposedly don't fear death, like upper-class citizens, people who seem to think they're immortal, or in this case, some people who actually are immortal. And I just like seeing how his pathology works. Ches sticks out amongst other immortal characters just because, while he does know how to communicate and in some cases manipulate people like an adult would, he still physically and mentally is still a kid. And it's fun to see his adult behavior and his child behavior clash at certain times. It's weird, but it makes sense considering he looks like a kid, but he's lived for like God knows how long. And of course, how can I forget Isaac and Miria? These two are freaking hilarious. If you don't know, they're these two thieves who basically commit the dumbest robberies you could imagine, like stealing time by taking people's watches, or preventing people from getting into a museum by stealing the door. It's just, they're so oblivious, but at the same time they have such energy when they're together, and they're so nice to everyone that it's hard not to appreciate these two. Just whenever they're on screen, they always put a smile on my face. And their relationship is a weird one, because while they don't really talk to each other like a normal couple would, you can kind of believe that they are, because their movements are pretty much synchronized together perfectly, and the fact that Isaac says so many things that don't make sense and Miria always agrees with him just shows how stupid the two of them are. And the fact that they meet pretty much every character in the show makes for a lot of hilarious moments. My favorites are pretty much the ones where they're with Jacuzzi on the train, pretty much scaring him about this creature called the Rail Tracer. And it's just hilarious how built up and over the top it is. The animation does a good job at not only displaying typical anime features like their eyes or their facial expressions, but also design these characters to look American through the color and style of their hair to the clothes that they're wearing, and they capture the Prohibition era and what the people looked like back then very nicely. And one thing I love about the Baccano action scenes is that you can actually see what's going on. One thing I've never been a fan of in anime were static shots during action scenes, because when you see a still image of a hit or a punch, I don't really feel anything because you don't actually see the hit. I know that animation is a long and expensive process, but would you rather see a full-length punch or just a picture of someone getting punched? Which is why in these action scenes, you see them get wounded, you do see them bleed. In fact, some characters are dressed in all white just out of bloodlust. And when immortal characters get wounded, the show has a very cool and very creative way to show how their wounds heal, and in that sense the animation is detailed very nicely. I know a lot of people who are turned off by anime just because of how some Japanese culture doesn't always translate into America very well. But just like Cowboy Bebop, the cool thing about this show is that it feels so Americanized that you don't even need to be a real big fan of anime to watch it. The show's atmosphere is stylized in an American fashion through dialogue that feels straight out of a 40s gangster movie, featuring slang like "let's blow" or "kick it to the curb" that you would see in like a Prohibition-era movie. And the other thing that adds to the atmosphere is Motoko Yoshimori's very energetic musical score that features a lot of cool jazz numbers. And as I already mentioned, the characters have an American look to them, and the settings of New York City and the Flying Pussyfoot are animated to great detail and are designed in a way that does look like something out of the Prohibition. My only problem with Baccano centers around this one storyline involving a mob family called the Runaratas and this girl named Eve Genoward, and both of them are looking for Eve's brother, Dallas. And it's not that this storyline is bad by any means, the characters are still enjoyable, but the other two storylines had a lot more characters and a lot more twists and turns that the Genoward-Runarata story really doesn't have as much weight as the other two storylines. But aside from that, Baccano was a lot of fun with its enjoyably psychotic characters, the awesome animation, and the exciting action scenes, as well as the Americanized atmosphere. That this is an anime that I would love to see adapted. I'd be pretty excited if they did, because this is a pretty simple one, I think, for Hollywood to adapt. And for that reason, I'm going to give Baccano 4.5 out of 5. Guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, like, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or Google+. Take care.